What I'd like to do with you now is to look a little bit at the three major symbols that we often get familiar with, that we get confronted with when we look at images of Michael, and to have a very brief look at what they're like and what they might possibly mean. So you have a relatively modern picture here of Michael, and in it you've got quite prominently the dragon, then the sword, sometimes it is also a lance, and the third symbol that we haven't really talked much about so far is the pair of scales, the balance. You will remember from what Alan said, and also maybe from things that you have already experienced, that the dragon is a bit of a shorthand for those kind of things in our lives which we need to face in order to be able to overcome them. So this could be an obstacle, or it could be an active threat that is coming towards it, but in some form or another it is something with which I have to engage in possibly a combative kind of way, but certainly in a way that requires my alertness, my energy, my wakefulness, and that hopefully will allow me to grow in the process of doing it. So actually, this dragon is not something that overcomes me, subsumes me, kills me, but it's something that in engaging with it, in overcoming it, I find that I benefit, I grow, I become something stronger, possibly better, something more conscious, something more maybe in tune with what I want to be. And so in a strange kind of way, the dragon has helped me on my way, you could say. And to illustrate what I mean by that, I just want to give you two possible dragons in our lives right now. One of those is the digital revolution. So many of us who were growing up before the screen became an all-pervasive thing, have heard the argument many times that by the increasing prevalence of screens in our lives, we have lost human touch, human closeness, a sensitivity for what it means to have a real human meeting with another person. And I'm sure that's not wrong. I'm sure that there is something very deeply truthful in that. So this picture that I carry with me from one of the schools where I worked in, where in the afternoon, 3 kindergarten teachers were sitting next to each other doing their assessment type work on computers and writing emails, literally writing emails to each other, asking each other a question via email instead of turning around and asking the question of the person who sits 50 centimeters to your right. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. And of course, that's not a good development. We really can't find something satisfactory about that. So this is a challenge that we met with, the anti-personal, the anti-human aspects of the modern digital technology. So that's one dragon that's standing there between a human being and another human being. And another one you could say is, and has been, the coronavirus. Not only, of course, has it caused a lot of anxiety, pain, even death in 1 or 2 people in each of our acquaintances, I think, but also it stopped us, again, from meeting each other, from having real encounters, by forcing us into lockdown, by forcing us behind masks and so on. So this depersonalizing dragon seems to have been a bit of a theme recently. And yet, you know what? It's because of these 2 dragons that you and I are meeting now, that we're having this meeting. Because without computer technology, we would not be able to be in the same room and see each other's faces and see whether somebody laughs or smiles or falls asleep. If they're in Lithuania or in Belgium or in the UK, we would not be able to work together and learn from each other in quite the same way. And without the coronavirus, we would never have had the idea to do this. There have been maybe ideas of that one could do something online, but the upskilling in the Zoom technology, the way that we work now, that has been forced upon us by that dragon. And so here we have the combined dragons of computer and corona, both signing responsible for something that wouldn't have happened without their challenge to us. So this is a good picture of what the human being does with that kind of obstacle. We use it and we create something new and we grow in the process. The second symbol I'd like to draw your attention to is the sword of Saint Michael, or as I said, sometimes it's a lance. It's quite significant that it's not a 12-bore shotgun and it's not a great big wooden club that Michael uses to batter the dragon with, but it's something as pointed, as elegant and as precise as a long piece of steel with a point at the end of it. Because the lance or the sword are the picture for the precision of human thinking. Warm human thinking, but precise human thinking. It's this kind of discernment that allows us to discover the essence of something or someone else. And if we apply it to a dragon, it doesn't necessarily mean causing mortal injury, but it means I know you for what you are, and therefore you no longer have power over me. We've got a wonderful picture of this in the story of Rumpelstiltskin, the Grimm fairy tale, where the being that controls the miller's daughter puts her under a lot of threat, and if she doesn't find out his name, she won't be able to become free again. And then she does find out his name and she names him, and he can't cope with that at all. He becomes very dragon-like, very draconian in his final rage. He loses himself completely in this red mist of anger. But she is very precise and very clear about calling him Rumpelstiltskin and therefore gaining the mastery. And if I recognize and understand something by calling its name, by calling it out, then in Shakespeare's words, it has me not. It can no longer control what I do. So maybe one slightly more close example is from our classroom practice. Some of you might be familiar with the feeling that you're worried about going in front of a class because you're frightened of the children. You're frightened that they might laugh at you. You're frightened that they might get bored. They might behave badly. They won't like you. And they won't respect you. And it causes you a sort of fear that almost paralyzes you. And some clarity of thinking can help you understand where that fear comes from. Because why is it that some people have this and others don't? And it may be that with the help of a mentor or somebody who is your coach or something like that, you discover that actually in your childhood, that's exactly what your parents did to you. Because they always questioned everything you did, they criticized everything you did, and so you've learned not to trust your ability to do something, because you're always expecting criticism. Now, once you've understood that, you've named your dragon. You know where that undefinable, actually fairly unjustifiable fear is from. And then your mentor can say to you, or you can say to yourself, well, the children in my class aren't like that. They're not there because they're expecting me to do well or not to do well. They don't have that kind of agenda at all. This is a completely different situation, and any kind of fear of failure that I might have developed as a child is completely inappropriate here. The children actually are much more positive than my parents would have been when I was a child, and they're actually encouraging, so they're providing the wind under my wings. That kind of picture will allow you to soar, you see, and overcome your fear. So it's clarity, penetrative sort of thinking, which allows you to do that. And finally, the image that isn't actually included in all the pictures of Saint Michael is the balance, the pair of scales. Now, in order to understand what that might mean, we have to understand the nature of this angel. Unlike other heavenly beings, Michael is not a giver of impulses. He is not somebody who makes big proclamations and says, mankind, follow me this way. So in the way that Gabriel says, Mary, you're going to have a child, or Adam and Eve, you're going out of paradise, that's not Michael's style. He is a supporter of human initiative. He accompanies the human being on their way, but he doesn't lead the way. In fact, even in a relatively medieval poem that may be familiar to those of you who work in UK Steiner schools, it says, "Thou ranger of the heavens, be thou at my back." It's an invocation of Saint Michael. Be thou at my back. In other words, I know where I'm going, but can I have your support, please? That's Michael's gesture. And so this path, if it is not his but our path that he accompanies, needs to be treading a balance between two polarities. And those two polarities I'd like to look at with you briefly, because for all of us in all kinds of situations, there are certain things about our lives, about our soul lives, that we recognize as eternally true. Things that are just really strong for us. So our conscience requires us to act in a certain way. And that when we know this to be right, and we do this. On the other hand, each of us works in a community. And to just do what our inner voice tells us might well cause us conflict, might cause us to lose our friends. And I'd like to show you something here. In my own words, this is a bit of a summary of one passage in a central chapter in one of Steiner's famous books, which is called Knowledge of the Higher Worlds. And there's a really important sentence at the beginning of the second paragraph here. I try not to force that upon my environment for which it can have no understanding. Say, for example, that you are utterly convinced that it's necessary for children to have learned to read and write without any kind of mistakes by the time they are 7. And because it's your ideal, you're going to do everything to achieve that. Now, any of us who have experience with children will know that this will not be possible without causing those children, some of those children, considerable pain, without even actually harming them. Without stressing their parents by putting pressure on them to practice, practice, practice. You could also be convinced of the opposite idea. You could be convinced that it's wrong for us to teach children to read and write, and that if you don't do anything but wave books at them in a general sort of way, eventually they will pick it up and come on board with it. And if you're really strongly convinced that that's the right thing, you might choose to do that. If you do this in isolation, without any recognition of the other human being, again, you will cause pain in this. You will have children eager to learn, looking at you with great shiny eyes, and not receiving guidance on their way. In other words, if you only do what you think is right, you become dogmatic. You become single-minded, and you lose friends, and you cause damage. On the other hand, if you only do what your environment asks you to do, and you have no inner convictions to stick by, then you become an empty vessel. You promise everything to everybody else, you try and please everybody around you, and in the end you'll end up disappointing everybody and also losing all your friends because they don't know what they've got in you. So in order to be healthy, you need to keep a balance between these two poles. On the one hand, as Steiner calls it, an open heart for the needs of others. So you ask, what does the world need of me? On the other hand, you need to be in tune with your inner convictions. What do I need to bring into the world? And it's taken me a long time to realize that you can't walk through life like this. And you can't walk through life like this. You can try, but you won't be happy, and you won't spread happiness around you. What you need to strive for, what we need to strive for is this, to keep those two things in balance. Because when they do balance, anything that is conflict, anything that is disagreement will become productive. Because I have something to contribute, but I also have something to receive. And if those two things are in balance, imagine in your own organization how brilliant that would be. What fantastic conversations you would have in your teachers' meetings if you all thought that way. And therefore, I'd like to finish with another way of imagining this balance. Now, this is no longer the image of the scales that Steiner refers to here. In the mirror of each soul, the community must find its reflection. And in the community, the strength of each individual can thrive. So we make a decision together and we look at it. Is everybody able to contribute something of themselves to that decision? And I make a decision about something I want to do, and I look, before I do that, I look, does everybody around me benefit from this? Now, there are maybe some very single, beautiful, enlightened individuals that do this all the time. Most of us will strive for this and occasionally manage, but take this as a vision, as a Michaelic vision. The idea that if we all had that kind of ideal, how brilliant our cooperation would become, how positive our conflicts could be, and how future-proof our collaboration could become. So this much as a picture of Michaelic community for the future. Thank you.